Hello and welcome to another sealed deck building exercise. Today we're taking a look at Hour of Devastation sealed, which means 4 boosters of Hour of Devastation and 2 boosters of Amonkhet. So let's get rolling here, and we'll start by opening up our boosters and then taking a quick look at them and then sort them by color, and then we'll go from there. So let's get started with our booster of Amonkhet. Our first card is Cancel, Thresher Lizard, Jero's Resolve, a Naga Oracle, Initiate's Companion, Pitiless Vizier, Horror of the Broken Lands, Luxa River Shrine, Hooded Brawler, River Serpent, Lord of the Accursed as our uncommon, Hazoret's Monument, Vizier of Tumbling Sands, and our rare is a Channeler Initiate. Alright, on to our second pack of Amonkhet, where we have Takrop Skirmisher, Minotaur Sure Shot, another Jero's Resolve, Hekma Sentinels, Doomed Dissenter, Benefaction of Aronas, Impeccable Timing, another Luxa River Shrine, another Horror of the Broken Lands, Cryptic Serpent as our first uncommon, Faith of the Devoted, a Shafet Monitor, and our rare is a Prepare to Fight. Alright, and we even get a foil Dread Wanderer. That's pretty neat. Always nice to get those foil rares, as you get basically an extra rare for your sealed pool. On to Hour of Devastation, where we have Frontline a Devastator, Unquenchable Thirst, Solitary Camel, Marauding Bone Slasher, Oasis Ritualist, Kenra Eternal, Ruin Rat, Life Goes On, Granitic Titan, Seer of the Last Tomorrow, Gideon's Defeat as our first uncommon, Jace's Defeat, all the defeats, a Claim to Fame, and our rare is a Fraying Sanity. Alright. Where we start off with a Tragic Lesson, Haven of Enduring Hope, Firebrand Archer, Beneath the Sands, Lurching Rot Beast, Jero's Renunciation, Unsummon, Desert of the Glorified, Manalith, Thorned Moloch, Accursed Horde, Burning Fist Minotaur, Sunscorched Champion, and our rare is an Angel of Condemnation. Sweet. On to Hour of Devastation number 3, where we have a Spellweaver Eternal, Dauntless Haven, Firebrand Archer, Bitterbow Sharpshooters, another Marauding Bone Slasher, another Manalith, Thorned Moloch, Without Weakness, Cunning Survivor, Desert of the Mindful, Supreme Will as our first uncommon, Appeal to Authority, Consign to Oblivion, and our rare is an Earthshaker Kenra. Alright, on to our final pack, where we have another Firebrand Archer, Aven Reedstalker, Disposal Mummy, Kenra Scrapper, Ratchet Camel, Ronas Stalwart, Desert of the Fervent, God Pharaoh's Faithful, Feral Prowler, Gilded Cerodon, Magmaroth as our first uncommon, followed by Steward of Solidarity, Eternal of Harsh Truths, and our final rare is a Driven to Despair. Alright, so now that we've cracked all our packs, it's time to take a look at our pool and take a look at the various colors to see their strengths and weaknesses, see how many creatures we have, how many removal spells, and so forth. Also, one thing to note is I've displayed all our mana fixing cards here on the top. And as you'll see, most of our mana fixing comes from green. We've got Channeler Initiate, Beneath the Sands, Oasis Ritualist, and Shafat Monitor, along with a couple of deserts that it could potentially go get. And also 2 copies of Manalith, which can also fix our mana and ramp us. So these are important to keep in mind in Sealed, where you can often end up in a deck, especially with Hour of Devastation now, that is base green but ends up splashing multiple colors for their powerful bombs and maybe removal spells. So that's something we have to keep in mind when going through all our colors. We always have to take a look at which cards we could potentially splash if we do end up in one of those base green multicolor decks. Also important to note is our desert count. We have 3 deserts, so these are very important to enable some of the various cards in Hour of Devastation. 2 copies of a Luxa River Shrine, which we can get out of the way since they're pretty bad. And then a whole lot of these Aftermath cards, which do open up doors to splashing some of the Aftermath colors just to get some of those effects. So let's get started here with our white cards, where I've put Angel of Condemnation on top since that's by far the most exciting card in white, but we still have a lot of powerful uncommons like Sunscorched Champion, Steward of Solidarity, Dauntless Aven, also a nice one since it can untap some of our Exert creatures, so especially powerful in a deck with lots of Exert creatures. Aven of Enduring Hope, also solid role player. And then Solitary Camel, fine if you have a few deserts, also just a 3 mana 3/2, so you could do worse. And Disposal Mummy, not the most exciting card. Then we get to God Pharaoh's Faithful, which can be nice in a more controlling defensive deck that just wants to survive long enough to get to the late game. We've got 1 Impeccable Timing, as basically our only removal spell in white. And then a few combat tricks here. We've got Jerris Renunciation, which can also cycle and tap 2 target creatures. We've got Gideon's Defeat, which can be a very powerful sideboard card. And then 2 Jerris Resolve, which we can also cycle or use to untap a creature and prevent all damage. So white looking pretty good here, especially of course because of the Angel of Condemnation, but also based on the strength of some of these uncommons. Moving on to blue, we see that we have a very deep blue pool here with a lot of playables, so let's go through them real quick. So we've got Cryptic Serpents, Eternal of Harsh Truths, and Spellweaver Eternal, which all kind of want to go in this spell-heavy blue deck with lots of ways to enable prowess and put instants and sorceries in the graveyard. We've got Naga Oracle, which is a solid role player, especially nice with Embalm and Eternalize cards, and maybe also with Aftermath cards since they can go to the graveyard. Then we've got Aven Reedstalker, which is just a medium filler card. Seer of Last Tomorrow can have some graveyard synergies, and we do also have a copy of Fraying Sanity, which we could use to maybe mill someone out, but I think that plan is a little too ambitious, so I think we can just get rid of these two. Takrop Skirmisher is also just a filler 2-drop. We've got Vizier of Tumbling Sands, which is a nice one since it can ramp us into bigger things. Also has cycling. Then we've got Cunning Survivor, which is also great with lots of discard and cycling effects. Same with the Heckma Sentinels, although not a very exciting card by itself. River Serpent I would play in almost any seal deck just as a cycler and then a late game 6 mana 5/5. Then we get to our non-creature spells where we have Unquenchable Thirst as an exciting removal spell, probably one of the best commons in Hour of Devastation. We've got Supreme Will as another nice one, can be used to counter something or to take a look at the top 4 and plays well with our other instants here like Tragic Lesson, which is a nice card draw spell in Sealed where things are a bit slower and getting card advantage can be important. And then Unsummon, which also goes very nicely with our cards like Spellweaver Eternal and especially Eternal of Harsh Truths, clearing a path so we can connect and maybe draw some cards. And then we also have Jace's Defeat, another nice sideboard card if we're up against another blue deck, and then a Cancel, which is just a medium card, maybe in a more controlling deck with lots of instants, like with the Supreme Will and Tragic Lesson, it can be fine, but that's basically it. So blue pretty deep, but not a lot of super exciting cards. The one I'm most excited about is basically the Unquenchable Thirst because it's also splashable. So in those base green decks we can still splash an Unquenchable Thirst as a nice removal option. So yeah, blue pretty deep, but not super exciting. Moving on to black, we see that we have a pretty major zombie theme. We've got Lord of the Accursed and Accursed Horde, which both synergize very nicely with our other zombies, which include the Dread Wanderer, 2 Marauding Bone Slashers, Wretched Camel, along with our Desert of the Glorified and our 2 other deserts if we're in those colors as well. Lurching Rod Beast, another zombie, Canra Eternal, also a zombie, and Doom Descender can also make a 2/2 zombie when he dies. And then we have 2 Horror of the Broken Lands, which is just a fine card, especially with lots of cyclers, and Pitiless Vizier also synergizes with the cycling and discard cards. Then a Ruined Rat, which can be a nice option for more defensive black decks. Also nice against the Eternalize and Embalm creatures since you can exile those. And then Without Weakness and Faith of Devoted are only 2 non-creature spells, and Without Weakness can be fine since it still has cycling, so you can cycle it away if it doesn't really come up that you need it. Faith of the Devoted, nice if you have a lot of cyclers, but I don't think we're anywhere close to having enough, so I think we can also get this out of the way just to save some time. Then taking a look at red, we also see that we have a lot of creatures and basically no non-creature spells in red, which is pretty strange. But taking a look at our creatures, we do have a few very powerful ones like Earthshaker Canra and especially the Burning Fist Minotaur are very powerful 2-drops in red. We've got Canra Scrapper, Minotaur Sure Shot, Thrasher Lizard in a maybe more aggressive deck can also be nice if you can empty your hand quickly. Frontline Devastator also very powerful. Then Gilded Ceradon along with our Desert of the Fervent and maybe some of the other deserts. Then Granitic Titan also has cycling, so is never too bad. And then we have a few of these cards that go in a spell heavy red deck with 3 copies of Firebrand Archer, 2 copies of Thorn Moloch with prowess, and the Magmaroth, which also wants you to cast a lot of non-creature spells. So this is kind of our package that would go well in a blue-red spells deck. But as we see, in blue we only had a handful of non-creature spells, and in red we don't have any non-creature spells. So I think it's going to be difficult to really enable this blue-red spells deck that our pool kind of wants us to be, but doesn't really support. And then a Hazardous Monument, which also put in red, since when you do have lots of creatures here, like is the case here, then of course Hazardous Monument becomes a lot more powerful since you can also get rid of excess lands and get those creatures in play sooner. So red, a pretty strange pool here with no non-creature spells, which also means no removal spells, which can be an issue. Then taking a look at green, of course we've got our mana fixers, which are just fine cards by themselves. And then we've got some beatdown cards here in Ronas the Stalwart, Initiate's Companion, Hooded Brawler, Bitterbow Sharpshooters, which goes also nicely in a more rampy, big mana deck. And then Feral Prowler, which also wants to be in a more defensive deck to stall a bit and buy some time. Life Goes On, pretty bad, can get that out of the way. and Benefaction of Ronas. We didn't see any enchantments that we're interested in, so I think we can also get rid of this. That leads us to our Aftermath cards here, where we've got Appeal to Authority and Prepare to Fight, which kind of go in the same deck, which is kind of this green-white beatdown deck with lots of creatures and then these as combat tricks. And then Driven to Despair, which can also be nice, just casting the Driven and then maybe casting the Despair part off of your green mana fixers. Claim to Fame is not a card I'm really interested in. This is more a card for Constructed than really a great card in Limited, so I think we can also get it out of the way. And then Consigned to Oblivion, which is also very powerful. This is just fine as a 2-mana blue bounce spell, but of course if you're blue-black it gets even better when you can also cast Oblivion. So overall, I think this pool definitely lacks removal spells. As we saw in black, we only had one non-creature spell. In red, we basically didn't have any non-creature spells. And then in blue, we basically had only the Unquenchable Thirst as a real removal spell, then a few counter spells and an unsummon. And then in white, we only had the Impeccable Timing, which counts as removal, and the Angel of Condemnation. So the fact that this pool is very light on removal spells makes me not want to go into this multicolor green deck, where you typically splash a bunch of removal spells, since we simply don't have them. We're also light on big mana cards that we can ramp into with cards like Manalith. So that makes me want to stay away from the Manalith in the first place, since if there's no payoff, then running a card like Manalith is not gonna do you any favors. So the first deck I want to try out is this green-white beatdown deck, since we would get access to our 2 Aftermath cards, access to our Angel of Condemnation and some of the other powerful uncommons in white. And some of these mana fixers in green are still just fine by themselves, and we also have some nice beatdown cards in green here. So yeah, first I'll try to build this green-white beatdown deck, see how that looks like, and if we have more time we'll take a look at some other builds and see how those look like. Alright, so this is how our green-white beatdown deck would look like. As you can see, we were kind of forced to splash a third and even actually a fourth color, just because in green-white we didn't have enough playables, since we're already playing all the creatures that we have available to us. So as you can see, we are playing some suboptimal creatures that don't really fit our deck's game plan. Cards like Feral Prowler aren't really at home here. Disposal Mummy is also a card I would rather not play in this deck. But these are simply the cards we have to work with, because we do need to maximize our creature count to make some of these combat tricks work. And then we were forced to basically splash these blue cards. So we've got Unquenchable Thirst, which is actually a nice removal spell, and then Consigned to Oblivion. And we can splash them basically thanks to our Channel Initiate, our Oasis Ritualist, and then we also have a Shafet Monitor and a Beneath the Sands. So we can pretty easily just include one island and splash the Unquenchable Thirst and the Consigned to Oblivion. And then we can also just add one swamp if we want to, just to get access to Oblivion and Despair, or we can just do without the swamp and just rely on the Channeler Initiate and the Oasis Ritualist to cast those for added effect. But I could definitely see that adding a swamp is worth it in this deck. But the deck definitely has some powerful cards in it. Of course, we've got our Angel of Condemnation. Prepare to Fight can also steal some games, same with Driven to Despair. And then in the sideboard we also have access to a card like Gideon's Defeat, which can come in against opposing white decks. Our deck also has some synergies with Exert cards and cards that untap things. So we've got Aronas Stalwart and Steward of Solidarity in the 2-drop slot that both have Exert. And of course the Channeler Initiate, which we can tap for mana. Then in the 3-drop slot we've got Hooded Brawler, which also has Exert, and then the Dauntless Aven that can untap a creature when we attack with it. And then also both the Angel of Condemnation and Oasis Ritualist have Exert. And so besides the Dauntless Aven, we also have Jarrus Resolve, which can untap a creature at instant speed. Same with Prepare to Fight. So those are some nice synergies as well. So overall, I don't hate the look of this deck. Of course, I would prefer to play some better creatures in some slots, but this is simply what we're working with. So I think we can move on to some other builds and maybe see if those look better than the one we currently have and go from there. So this is our attempt at a blue-red spells deck, even though we are pretty light in the spells department. A nice thing about the deck is of course that we have access to our blue and red deserts, which also synergize nicely with our Unquenchable Thirst and are just nice in general, since you can cycle them away late in the game if you don't need those lands. Then taking a look at our 2-drops, we've got a few that stand out. Our Spellweaver Eternal is very powerful. Earthshaker Kenra, the rare with haste, is very powerful since we can eternalize it late in the game. And then Burning Fist Minotaur is also one of the better uncommons in the set. Then we have in the 3-drop slots Thresher Lizard, Minotaur Sureshot, Kenra Scrapper, all relatively powerful 3-drops. And then Vizier of Tumbling Sands, which can do some ramping into some of our more expensive cards. And then Eternal of Harsh Truths, which also goes well with our bounce spells here and the removal spells in blue. Then in the 4-drops we've got Aven Reedstalker to give us some evasion, maybe get some damage in the air. And then Frontline Devastator, also very powerful. Then a Magmaroth can also go pretty well into this kind of deck, since we have a decent amount of instants and sorceries to remove those -1/-1 counters, although I could see taking that one out. Then Gilded Ceradon also goes with our 2 deserts nicely. Then 2 6-drop cyclers, and then also a Cryptic Serpent that has a bunch of instants and sorceries to go with it to make it less expensive, even though I could also see just cutting that one, since it might still end up costing us 5 or 6 mana. And then in the sideboard also a Jace's Defeat, which can come in against other blue decks. We can also play Hazoret's Monument in this deck, since we do have a lot of red creatures that would get their cost reduced, and of course getting to draw and discard is also great, since we do have some cards that would be nice in our graveyards, like the Skirmisher and our Earthshaker Kenra, but just being able to go through our deck, get rid of lands and get to our more powerful cards is also nice. We also have Tragic Lesson and Supreme Will, which we are probably not going to use as a counterspell very often, but more likely just as a proactive way to trigger prowess on our various creatures and get us deeper into our deck. And we also have Unsummon and Consign to Oblivion, just to clear a path and get in with our 2 and 3 drops. So this is definitely an aggressive blue-red deck and not a controlling one like you might expect. Right now we would have to make 1 cut if we want to play 17 lands, which I think we do in this deck, even though our curve is relatively low if you consider the cycling cards. But the first cards I would consider cutting are probably the Magmaroth, Granitic Titan, or perhaps the Cryptic Serpent, since it doesn't get its cost reduced by the Hazoret's Monument either. So the power level varied a bit more in the green-white deck, where we have some very powerful cards like the Condemnation Angel and some very weak cards like the Disposal Mummy, while here the power level is more constant, so this deck seems a little more consistent, but that doesn't necessarily mean that this deck is better. So between the two, I'm not sure which one is better. So a lot of options definitely, and of course both decks have access to a very powerful sideboard card in Gideon's Defeat and Jace's Defeat. So yeah, that does it for the blue-red deck. Maybe we can take a last look at our black cards, see if we can build a deck around our black cards, since we do have of course that zombie theme, and there are some zombies in other colors as well. So let's see what we can come up with our last deck here. So this is our blue-black deck, which has 2 major sub-themes. One of them is zombies, since the majority of our creature base are zombies, even the blue ones. So in black we have our Dread Wanderer, which is a zombie, Kenra Eternal, Ratchet Camel. Then the big payoff cards, of course, are Lord of the Accursed and Accursed Horde. But we also have Marauding Bone Slasher, which wants other zombies in play. We've got a Lurching Rod Beast, which is a zombie, and then even in blue we have our Spellweaver Eternal, then Takrop Skirmisher, if you embalm it, also becomes a zombie, and then Eternal of Harsh Truths. So as you can see, lots and lots of zombies and 2 big payoff cards for those zombies in Accursed Horde and Lord of the Accursed, and then of course also the Bone Slashers. Then the other big sub-theme in the deck is cycling, since in the 2-drop slot we have Cunning Survivor, which benefits from cycling and discarding. We have Heckma Sentinels, which does the same, and then also Pitiless Vizier in a 4-drop slot, and then 2 copies of Horror of the Broken Lands, and then lots of cyclers to go with them. We have our Vizier of Tumbling Sands, which can also cycle or just ramp us into bigger things. We've got our Lurching Rod Beast, which also cycles, then the Horrors themselves cycle, same with the River Serpent. Then the 2 deserts also cycle. Tragic Lesson lets us discard, which also triggers all those effects, and without weakness also can cycle if we wanted to. So lots and lots of cycling and lots of payoff cards for cycling. So overall this blue-black deck is actually quite synergistic and looks quite powerful overall. So right now we've got 25 cards displayed, which means I think we still need to make 1 cut, since I think we can get away with playing 16 lands in this deck rather than 17, despite having 2 cycling deserts, which might want you to play more lands than normal. We also have a lot of cycling creatures for just 1 mana, which kind of want you to play fewer lands. So overall I think we can get away with 16 lands, which means we still need to make 1 cut. Not entirely sure what that should be. Maybe we just take out the Kenra Eternal, because okay, it's a zombie to go with our Lord of the Accursed and Accursed Horde, but it is pretty weak overall and we already have a decent amount of 2-drops, so it might not be necessary. So this could be one of the cuts. And then of course in the sideboard we also have this Jace's Defeat, which can come in against other blue decks. So this deck does have the same problem as our previous builds, which is that we don't have access to a lot of removal, but I think unlike the other decks, this one makes up for it in synergy. So I think overall this deck probably looks like the best build of the 3, so I'm glad that we took the time to build all 3 decks just to come to this conclusion. So that's also going to conclude this sealed deck building exercise. I want to thank you for watching, I hope you enjoyed, and as always, have a nice day. I also want to thank all my patrons for supporting the channel, and you can do so yourself as well over at patreon.com/LegenVD, where you get cool rewards for supporting the channel, as well as getting us closer to our goals, where with every goal reached we will release an additional weekly series. So if you want to see more content, Patreon is the place to go.